This episode is brought to you by Roundtable Group, the experts on experts. We've been connecting attorneys with experts for over 25 years. Find out more at roundtablegroup.com.
Thank you and welcome to Discussions at the Roundtable. I'm your host, Michelle Lux, and my guest today is Laura DiBella. She's the Deputy Secretary of Commerce at Enterprise Florida, whose focus is on public-private partnerships in Florida ports, economic development, and international trade. Laura, thank you for joining our show. Let's start a little bit about your background in ports and maritime supply chain and the economic development and how that led you to become an expert witness.
It's great to be here. Appreciate the opportunity. It's been kind of a blessing how I landed on the expert witness list, but I certainly appreciate it. I started off in commercial real estate. I was a real estate broker. I worked on behalf of the largest healthcare operator in the world, HCA, Hospital Corporation of America. I was brokering real estate on their behalf. Through those efforts, they were having me look for land all over the state, for hospitals, freestanding emergency rooms, all sorts of things. I was introduced to Nassau County, the northeasternmost county in the state, on the Atlantic seaboard. And they were looking for an executive director for their economic development board. And they actually recruited me to that position. And at first I questioned it and I was like, this is not really what I do. But they insisted that it was good for me and they were right. So I went ahead and I took it. And that was the beginning of a really interesting journey that's led up to today. So 2.5 years into the 5 years that I was with Nassau County, I was basically voluntold to be port director because the Port of Fernandina needed some help. The Port of Fernandina is located in Nassau County, but is a separate entity from Nassau County. It's an independent special district of the state. So I got to learn a different type of state governance outside of county. And I was wearing two hats for 2.5 years. It was supposed to be a temporary thing and it turned into 2.5 years. So 2.5 years I was doing two jobs and really loved it. So from there in 2019, late 2019, November 2019, I was recruited from the Harbor Pilots to the Harbor Pilots, the Florida Harbor Pilots Association. They were looking for an executive director. They did not have one. This person was going to be in Tallahassee and going to represent them, not necessarily as a lobbyist per se, but, really as kind of being the eyes and ears on the ground and, one that's going to push policy and make sure that their name is always kind of out there, a little bit different than lobby functions, but is similar to, and manage all of everything they need. So they asked me to do it. Again, it was kind of something outside of my comfort zone, but something I thought was amazing and incredible opportunity, especially being the first executive director for the organization that was, well over 150 years old at the time. So I took it. And 3 months later, it was the pandemic. The pandemic hit, the shutdown hit, and the world as we understood it on the shipping side and everywhere else collapsed. So it was a really trying time for them. It was a very trying time for a lot of people, but especially for them. Especially with just the unknowns that were surrounding the coronavirus and the infection rate and how they needed to do their jobs. They didn't have the ability or the privilege or opportunity to stay home. Like they had to continue to move those ships. So we had to, and on top of it, they needed to continue to move ships with basically a half of their revenue source, more than half, and sometimes almost 99% of their revenue source, depending on what pilot station we were talking about in the state. We have 11 of them in the state of Florida, where their revenue was just completely cut off because of the cruise business that was suspended for a very long time. So anyways, turned into, I became the economic developer for the Harbor Pilots. And that was, basically what was keeping the state operating. If I had to tell you that, disaster loans were basically keeping things humming along, I wouldn't be lying. That was the absolute truth. So it was a a very interesting time, but thankfully the background in economic development and understanding business resources and emergency, disaster loans, because I've been through a few hurricanes in my life.
Yes.
In career, certainly helped there. But so take that all together, and that's where the expert witness opportunities kind of started to come to me, because I guess I guess there's not a lot of people that kind of have all these experiences under one belt. So especially maritime is a really niche field, with it's a small world. It's a big world, but a small world at the same time. So I'll never call myself an expert, but people seem to think I kind of know what I'm talking about in some ways. So I'm happy to help, and that's how I ended up here with the group before I was appointed secretary. So I need to make that clear. I cannot do expert witness work in my position now, but I had the ability to do it before.
Sure.
So,
That does
yeah.
make sense. Is it something where you would be like an in-house expert, though, perhaps, for any litigation that's sent your way?
Oh, sure. I mean, I don't want to say never. I guess it's just there's just a delicate balance as far as what I can handle now. So I currently am not active on any cases at the moment. But that's not to say that I wouldn't take any on that certainly wouldn't have any conflicts with any of my business in the state. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, when you were, really practicing as an expert witness, did you find that you had to balance your time, and how did you organize yourself for those cases? Like, what was some tips and tricks that you put forth to be at the top of your game as an expert witness?
I am a voracious reader. The more I got into, the maritime world, the shipping world, and just all of the challenges around it. I was very well versed in all the the trade publications, just learning all aspects of the supply chain, trying to stay ahead of what was next, because there was every time you turn around, we were waiting for the other shoe to drop, it seems, for nearly 3 years. Even now, you can say it's still going on to this day. So, there's just so many, fits and starts and rapid shocks, in different directions. So trying to looking for lead indicators, be it like across the pond, whatever is happening in China, wherever what's happening with rail strikes around the world and all sorts of other things. So, basically just being on top of the international news world was really helpful. And, it's something I still do to this day. It certainly helps me in my current role. But that allowed me to provide some perspective, to the team, the legal team, that was looking for guidance, and really was looking for the why. So you can tell them, this is the way it is, be an expert witness. But I think it helps when you really add context as to the why, like this is the reasoning, and bringing, really educated. And I think that's the thing with the expert witness. We're educators, we're consultants, we're really there to explain a world that doesn't, that is completely foreign to somebody else. And it, I'm talking about maritime is so foreign to so many people. So simplifying it into, words that they understand. And that was kind of my job when I was working for the harbor pilots. Nobody knew what a harbor pilot was. So I had to, and the harbor pilots themselves will be the first to tell you that they're not that great in explaining what they do, as far as putting it all together sometimes. So it's really, picking things apart and conveying them in a way that people will understand.
Sure. Have you worked on international cases? You talked about you read up on it. Have you ever been an expert for an international matter?
Yes. Yes, actually that most of what I was working on would be considered international. Yeah.
Sure. And did you find that there was different parameters around that you would find in the US courts instead?
Um,
Did anything catch you by
I-
surprise as far as like not knowing what you were walking into and having to be educated
no,
on it?
no, not necessarily, because when you're dealing with maritime, you are dealing with international law.
Okay.
So it's kind of that's the space that you kind of run in. I mean, it's that's the weird complexity of maritime, which is why your pool of experts, is very narrow, because maritime covers international, state, national, it's very layered, and very nuanced, and it's very old, and it hasn't changed in hundreds of years. So there's a lot of complexity around international maritime law.
Sure.
So, and I, again, by no means, know everything, but, know enough to be dangerous to say, well, this is not, this should be a state matter. This is an international matter. So, because of where certain things take place.
Interesting. How about, can you share a story of maybe one of the cases you're on as an expert witness that was the most interesting, or something that was a learning moment for you?
I'm on one case, which I think is on pause right now, as they're working through some things that really taught me about. It had to do with a Caribbean nation, and some port activity in that nation. I can't say too much about it, but it forced me to to basically become a rapid expert in all Caribbean nations, Caribbean island nations, and transshipment activity surrounding those nations. So what appeared to be on the surface a very isolated activity, research type of application, turned into a very, very big discussion, because there's no way to explain the potential of what's happening in one area without pointing to what was going on somewhere else, and saying this is what you can expect here if X, Y, and Z happens.
Sure.
So by giving comparisons, because the argument was over the potential of what was going on there. It was not the realization of what was there. It was kind of somewhat what was already there, but also what could be there.
Mhm.
So that was where the education really had to come in. Saying, well, ports aren't just looked at as, a property that's bound, next to the water. Ports can be pretty much anywhere. So there's inland ports, there's, functions of ports that generate revenue that aren't necessarily on the waterfront. So it was really a very complex case, extremely.
And then how about any last thoughts about being an expert witness that you can share with our listeners, about either how to be successful or things that you learned along the way?
Well, I mean, I would, if anybody gets the opportunity to be an expert witness, I would hope that they would take it, because it really, number one, it's fun. I really loved doing it. I worked on the weekend. How did I balance my time? I just did it whenever I could. So when you were asking before, it really broadens your horizons. It really expands, your knowledge. You don't realize how much you know until you have to educate someone else on that topic. And then it opened up a whole new world for me as far as, what I could offer, and taking my current role into account. Basically I feel like I'm kind of the expert witness now into state government. So it's you're I've taken that confidence that I gained by, working on these, incredible cases, which I feel really lucky to participate in. And parlaying that, that knowledge and know-how to some pretty key people now. So it was a wonderful experience, and it comes back to you in many different ways. As you continue on your career journey, doing what you do already outside of the expert witness work. So I like it. I like it a lot. I had a great relationship with, the legal team. So I just think it just opens up a lot of opportunities and doors.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Laura, for your time. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Discussions at Roundtable. Our show notes are available on our website, roundtablegroup.com. Subscribe today on Apple Podcasts or your favorite listening apps.